Tonight on Reporting Scotland, more than 30 years after the miners' strike, ministers announce a review into policing.
I was arrested often at picket lines, thrown in the back of a police van, held until the picket was finished and taken somewhere out in the country and generally dropped off.
Also on the programme, the cost of a funeral has leapt by 75% in the last 8 years, leaving families struggling to pay. A student nurse from Paisley who was threatened with deportation has been granted permanent residency in the UK. Meet Wilson and Applejack, the Shetland ponies who are visiting people with dementia in Aberdeen. And Scotland's women footballers continue their quest to qualify for the World Cup for the first time. Good evening. An independent review is to be held into the impact of policing during the miners' strike. Many Scottish communities were caught up in the nationwide industrial action in 1984 and 5. Former miners were in the public gallery as the Justice Secretary, Michael Matheson, made the announcement in Holyrood. They've welcomed the decision. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Reil Alderson, reports.
It's more than 30 years ago, but the review announced today will examine the way the national miners' strike was policed. It left scars in many communities across Scotland.
I was arrested often at picket lines, thrown in the back of a police van, held until the picket was finished and taken somewhere out in the country and generally dropped off and told to go home.
The strike lasted more than a year and there was undoubted violence on both sides. At first when pickets tried to stop imported coal reaching industrial plants, and then when some men started to drift back to work. Former miners were in the public gallery at Holyrood and they've welcomed the review.
They'll be able to look at what happened, they'll be able to see where the mistakes were made, they'll be able to see that it was the state versus a trade union. And I think if they come up with a conclusion that proves beyond doubt, something we've always known as miners, but the general public have never known it, and young people don't understand it, and I think they will see the power of the state was used in a way that should never have been used.
Cabinet papers released after 30 years reveal Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's determination to crush the dispute and called on police to pursue vigorously all possible means of accelerating the prosecution of alleged offences.
I hope this reverberates all the way to number 10 Downing Street. The release of the Cabinet papers under the 30-year rule and the fallout from the Hillsborough inquiry exposed how the police and judiciary acted under the centralised political direction of the then Thatcher government and were instructed to defeat the strike, no matter the cost.
The review won't look at prosecutions of miners during the strike. It's estimated 10% of the national workforce was in Scotland, but 30% of all prosecutions during the strike were here. In all, more than 500 miners received convictions during the dispute.
I hope, Presiding Officer, that my decision to establish this review underlines the importance that the Scottish Government attaches to this issue and our understanding that there are questions about the impact on communities that remain to be answered.
Some of the worst violence happened at the Orgreave coking plant in South Yorkshire. Scottish ministers say they hope their review, which will report next June, will force Westminster to reconsider its decision not to examine events in the strike in England. Reil Alderson, reporting Scotland.
The cost of a burial in Scotland has risen by 75% since 2010. That's according to figures obtained by the BBC. The cost of a funeral is now around £3,600, although it varies considerably across the country. Our correspondent Lucy Adams reports.
I was trying to grieve for my mum, but at the end of the day I couldn't grieve for my mum because I had all this on the back of my head. You just curl up in the corner somewhere and it's just hard when you've not got the money.
Gordon's mother Lilias died last year. He'd given up his job to care for her, but found he wasn't entitled to government help to pay for her funeral because she had an insurance policy worth £1,500.
Marmalade?
Gordon now uses food banks to get by. He arranged a simple funeral for his mother. Her life insurance covered just half the total bill, and he now has to find £1,600.
On behalf of the funeral, everything just sort of struck. like being in debt with your rent and then being in debt with the funeral costs now. I was not getting any help.
Death is an expensive business and the price is rising. New data obtained by BBC Scotland shows that the basic cost just for the opening of a burial plot or lair varies from about £300 in the Western Isles to almost £1,800 in sterling. Overall, the cost has risen 75% across Scotland since 2010. Council body COSLA told us it's up to local authorities to decide what they charge based on need and circumstance. But when it comes to the cost of a funeral, the cremation or burial charge is just the beginning. In addition, there's the coffin, the hearse and the service. And there'll be other costs too, including food, flowers and weekend surcharges. The Funeral Expenses Fund run by the UK government has been fixed at £700 since 2003, despite a doubling in the average cost of a funeral, which is now £3,600 in Scotland.
We have packages, which makes it easier.
This funeral director says he's kept his prices the same since 2015, but that he can't control council price rises.
A recent funeral poverty meeting called by North Lanarkshire Council, they had asked us what we can do to help our clients save money. And I said quite simply, go to West Lothian, because I can save my clients £800. At the moment, without any question, there is a postcode lottery on the cost of buying and opening glares.
The rising cost of funerals means some people are left unburied for months and even years. Figures obtained by the BBC show there are 26 unclaimed bodies in hospital mortuaries, including a 68-year-old man in Glasgow who's been there for almost 2 years. 8 people have been identified but have not been buried due to either family disputes or cost.
Yes, that is horrific, and I know there are many reasons why bodies aren't claimed, but undoubtedly, some of those reasons will be to do with financial hardship. So I actually believe we all have a role to play, because without a doubt, funeral costs are pushing families into poverty, and that's not acceptable. So we all have a role to play to end funeral poverty in Scotland.
The Scottish Government will take over the UK funeral benefit next year and increase the number of people who can receive it. This social enterprise offers direct cremations without a memorial service for less than £1,000.
This might be the biggest purchase someone ever makes in their whole life, is the cost of someone else's funeral, a loved one. And at that very moment that they're trying to get through their grief, suddenly they're also trying to make the sums stack up. So very often they're falling back on putting on a credit card. I haven't thought about whether or not to pay, how I'm going to pay for that later.
It's not any good when you're not working. No, it's not.
Gordon's just started a new job, but it will take him many years to repay his debt.
I think it's absolutely terrible, some of the prices are asking. But that's the way it is. You come in this country for nothing and then you've got to pay to go out, so it's quite hard.
Lucy Adams, reporting Scotland.
Police have launched an investigation after the discovery of a man's body in Angus. Cordons were put in place around the Loch of Kinnordy Nature Reserve near the town of Kirriemuir early this morning. Inquiries are at an early stage. STV Chief Executive Simon Pitts has said that plans which could see more than 50 staff lose their jobs are necessary to guarantee the broadcaster's future. Giving evidence to MSPs, he also dismissed speculation that the station was being readied to be sold off to ITV. STV announced plans last month to close its loss-making STV2 channel and restructure its news operation. A student nurse from Paisley who carried the Queen's baton in the 2014 Commonwealth Games has had the threat of deportation lifted. 23-year-old Denzil Dark has been granted permanent residency in the UK after a review of his case. Glenn Campbell caught up with him this afternoon. He's here now. What did he have to say?
Well, Mr Darku is relieved that he has been granted the right to remain in the country because the threat of deportation has been hanging over him for 2 years, even though he considers Scotland as his home. Not just because he carried the Queen's baton at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games back in 2014, but he's also served on the Scottish Youth Parliament and wants to have a career in the NHS. And he told me that he couldn't imagine having to start his life all over again in Ghana, as he had to do when he moved to Scotland 9 years ago.
I came here when I was quite young, moved over here to a new place, to a new city, different accent, and I had to settle in, fit in, make friends, start a new life all over again. And I mean, to be given a letter that, oh, you're supposed to go back to where you came from, somewhere that I've not been in so long, it was quite scary.
His case was raised at Holyrood last Thursday.
There can be no justification for driving a young man like Denzil away from the place he calls home.
That was widely applauded, but Conservatives did not join in, even though it's since emerged their leader twice raised Denzil Darku's case with the Home Office. The First Minister said he should be allowed to stay.
I've met Denzil in the past. He is a fine young man. He is an absolute credit to Scotland, and it is outrageous, scandalous, a disgrace that he is threatened with deportation.
At Westminster, the SNP took up the case with the Home Secretary.
I am very sympathetic about the situation, and there will be no enforcement action while the appeal takes place.
3 days later, Mr Darku, whose case had already made headlines, was granted permanent residency.
I'm still in shock. I still don't know how to react because it's been a long time coming. For over 2 years now, I've still been in limbo of what to do. So I'm quite pleased and quite happy that at least I can move on with my life now and go back to uni and get back on studying.
He wants to become a nurse and to resume his studies at Stirling University to get on with his life. But I think Mr Darku's case might leave a legacy because it's opened up the debate about who should and shouldn't be allowed to live in our country and perhaps what kind of immigration system we should design when that comes under review as part of the Brexit process.
Glenn Campbell, thank you very much. The troubled House of Fraser is to shut its department store in Edinburgh's Princes Street, putting 127 jobs at risk. Across the UK, a total of more than 6,000 posts are under threat, with 31 stores earmarked for closure. Stephen Godden has more.
Stand outside Fraser's, speak to the people waiting underneath the clock, and very quickly you get a sense of
Fraser's, bins, what do you
call it bins because like in the 60s when we had a date, we used to meet the boys here at bins.
If you met a girl here, that was the most famous thing. You get on the bus, you just pass the bus, see if she's there, if she's not there, you just drive on.
Today, however, time ran out for this department store. To survive, House of Fraser say they need to shut more than half of their UK stores, a move that will affect 6,000 employees. Fraser's at the west end of Princes Street, which employs 127 people, is the only Scottish store on the list.
High streets have become increasingly challenging. Footfall has fallen every month since April 2016, and as a consequence of that, the viability of these stores has become more and more challenged.
The business that became House of Fraser was established in Glasgow in 1849. The Buchanan Street store isn't affected, but company offices in the city are being relocated. Back in the capital, another famous landmark will continue to carry the House of Fraser brand.
This is classic consolidation. What they've done is they've kept the flagship store. They've kept the one that's got the atrium, the one that's got a bit of feature and a bit of theatre about it. At Christmas in Jenner's, you've got the big tree there in the hall there. It gives something that drags people in. The other store at the far end, the one that's closing, really, it's just a standard store. There's not really much to pull people into that store.
Earlier this year, when the building was sold to a hotel developer, there was speculation that House of Fraser may give up their long-term lease. And that's exactly what's happening.
I suppose we used to go in and shop when we were teenagers, but apart from that, you know, I've not really, in the last couple of years, I've not really gone in very often.
Well, I feel quite sad about it, but it's time to change with the times and everybody's shopping online.
It's not yet a done deal, but if the company get the backing of 75% of creditors for their proposal, this store will close its doors for good early next year. Stephen Godden reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
ScotRail is promising more seats and better journey times between Glasgow and Edinburgh starting in the next few weeks. The already busy route has been running shorter trains for months. Now ScotRail have hired 10 trains to help ease the situation. Aileen Clark is outside Glasgow Queen Street Station for us tonight. Aileen.
Well, if you haven't been here for a wee while, take a look. That's Queen Street Station behind me, but it's in the middle of some major rebuilding work at the moment. Now, of course, the route from here through to Edinburgh, ScotRail believes, is one of its flagship routes. But when you speak to people who use it, as I've done today, it doesn't feel very flagship to them. As one woman said to me, you know, sometimes it's a big enough bun fight just trying to get on the train, let alone trying to get a seat.
About 2 weeks ago, I stood for the whole journey home and the carriage was so packed that people were coming out the door at each stop, literally falling out of the door. So it felt like a cattle carriage, so it wasn't good, not good at all.
If you try and get on the train in peak times, it's very difficult to get a seat.
I found that at peak times, you're often having only about 3 carriages on, so it was chocker. There's often no seats, really, really packed, just not a pleasant experience really to be travelling.
Now, that has got particularly bad in recent months because ScotRail's lease ran out on 4 trains. The new electric trains that are coming in behind them, well, they're not ready yet. So that means that there was trains with fewer amount of carriages going back and forth to Edinburgh at various times of the day. These electric trains are still not ready. So what ScotRail have told us today they've done is they have hired 10 electric trains to try and help them over this gap. And they say that these trains that they've hired will make a big difference to people that are travelling between Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Once we introduce these additional fleet of electric trains, the chances of getting a seat will be much improved. We'll be operating 8-car electric trains for the first time. Once we've done that, 75% of our service between Edinburgh and Glasgow will be operated by electric trains, which make the journey time quicker and they're higher capacity. This is an interim move until our brand new Hitachi trains arrive later this year, and then we'll be able to have a fully electric service between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and we're going to cut the journey time further to just 42 minutes.
But here's the thing, don't think that you'll be able to get on a train to Edinburgh tomorrow or get on a train in Edinburgh to Glasgow and have a nice comfy seat and be going really fast, because these trains are having to be phased in. So it's going to be weeks before all 10 of these new hire trains are in service. And that 42 minutes that they're talking about as being kind of standard between here and Edinburgh, well, that is going to be entirely reliant on this new fleet of trains, which at the moment they're still testing. All of that, I have to say, will be no comfort to the people who have had their train journeys disrupted tonight because of a signalling problem here at Queen Street. They've been coming from all sorts of other places, and as they've been saying to me on Twitter, what's happening to our route and when's that going to get better?
Well, thanks very much for cheering us up. Aileen Clark there at Queen Street Station. You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's 14 minutes to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. More than 30 years since the miners' strike, ministers announced a review into the impact of policing. And still to come, meet Wilson and Applejack, the Shetland ponies who are visiting people with dementia in an Aberdeen hospital. Today is the 150th anniversary of the birth of the artist and architect Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Many of his best-known buildings are marking the occasion, including the newly restored tea rooms he designed in 1903. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean reports.
This is more than a tea room. It's a work of art created by Charles Rennie Mackintosh for the legendary Miss Cranston in 1903. This was the only one of the 4 tea rooms in the city in which he created every single detail himself. And it's that which has been restored in this £10 million project, which supporters raced against the clock to have opened today.
We actually only took the building over at 7:30 this morning and moved all the furniture in at 7:30 this morning, got the table set, got the server restocked, and so on. But it was so important to be open on this day, the 150th commemoration of Macintosh's birthday.
There are 4 Macintosh buildings near the centre of Glasgow which give us problems of preservation.
Macintosh hasn't always been so celebrated. This was the year of his 100th anniversary, when 4 of his buildings were threatened by the new ring road. The Willow Tea Rooms for a while were absorbed into a department store, the building and its iconic details pushed into the background.
I think there have been those who've campaigned for Macintosh. I think the quality of his work has inspired, and the city has realised its significance artistically and also economically for the city as a tourist draw. And I think as we sit here in the Salon de Luxe, isn't there a wonderful sense of beauty and serenity, a timelessness that's unique to Macintosh?
Today, though, it was time for tea.
Very nice, and it's got that feel. It's definitely got the Macintosh feel.
I think this is fantastic, and it'll be a great asset to the tourist attractions of Glasgow.
The rest of us will have to wait till September to savour Macintosh at the Willow once more. Pauline McLean, reporting Scotland.
It's another big night for Scotland's women footballers as they continue their quest to qualify for the World Cup for the first time. Tonight they take on Belarus at the Falkirk Stadium, and we can join Alistair Lamont there. How big a game is this then, Al?
Yeah, it's absolutely huge, Sally, because the reality is that Scotland absolutely have to win this match and all the rest of their matches if they have to have a chance of qualifying for the World Cup. The win over Poland last time out took them to 6 points from the group leaders. They're second place currently, but 6 points behind Switzerland, albeit with tonight's game in hand. But in reality, they have to keep winning if they are to have any chance of making that World Cup. But having said all that, they should have enough about them to beat tonight's opponents. They've already beaten Belarus away from home in this campaign, and the last time these opponents were in Scotland about 3 years ago for a qualifier, they were in the wrong end of a 7-0 hammering. I've just been handed the Scotland team sheet, and there's quite a few survivors from that match. In fact, Jane Ross scored a couple of goals in that game, Lisa Evans, Caroline Weir, Rachel Corsie, all on the score sheet on that night. A couple of changes from Scotland's last time out. Kirsty Smith and Erin Cuthbert have come into the team. Erin Cuthbert's a real talent. She plays for Chelsea up front. She scored against Poland in that last match as well. Scotland will be looking to her, among others, for goals this evening. It's a beautiful night in Falkirk, only £5 to get in if you can come along to watch the match. If you can't manage that, then join us on Sports Sound live on BBC Radio Scotland. We'll have the full match commentary there.
Thanks very much, Al Lamont here in Falkirk. St Mirren want Alan Stubbs to be their new manager. Stubbs was manager of Hibs when they won the Scottish Cup in 2016 before he left for an unsuccessful spell with Rotherham in the English Championship. He's now the preferred candidate for St Mirren after their previous manager Jack Ross left the club to take over at Sunderland. Shetland ponies have been visiting patients who have dementia at an Aberdeen hospital. The miniature ponies are specially trained as therapy pets, and they've already been brought into care homes with very positive results. Fiona Stalker reports.
Suited and booted and ready for a morning's work. Wilson and Applejack are larger than your average therapet, but the mission is the same.
Can I give him a cuddle?
Bringing calmness and joy to the patients.
Diana, what do you think of Applejack?
Super, look at it. Look at that. Well, I sort your hair. He doesn't like it disturbed, you see, that's what it is. He's lovely, look.
So do you have memories of horses and ponies when you were younger?
Oh, I do at the beach. Oh, I got a lot of that.
And unlocking some of those memories is part of what these ponies can help with.
The responses that the ponies evoke from loads of the residents is just been quite amazing. They cuddle them, they kiss them, they throw their arms around them, and it's just incredible. And it's lovely to see, and it's lovely to see people happy and enjoying themselves. And it takes them back sometimes to years gone by when they maybe in their younger life had ponies or associated with ponies or just enjoying being around them.
And that's little Applejack over there, he's 2.
This visit to the Royal Cornhill Hospital is thought to be the first time that theraponies have been used in a mental health facility in Scotland. It won't be the last.
Yeah, I've never felt such a buzz amongst patients. They've been so excited as soon as we picked them up this morning. They've come in, they're just loving it. Everyone's smiling, happy. It's one of the most positive days I think we've ever had here. Everyone's so excited.
What did you think of them?
Beautiful. I'd like to take one home.
There's growing evidence that therapets like Wilson and Applejack can have a very positive impact on people living with dementia. The feedback today from the patients, families and staff has been absolutely overwhelming. A good day's work for these guys. Fiona Stockart reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
It's time now for the weather, Chris, and bye-bye sunshine, is it?
A few more days of it to come, Sally. Thank you very much. Hello there, good evening to you. Well, a beautiful day for many of us. Plenty of sunshine and blue sky. Fab picture from one of our weather watchers, Mimi in Maud there. But there was some cloud around. Let's zoom in. You can see this area of cloud producing some thunderstorms. This is in the last few hours, moving their way south along Loch Lomond, and they could just push in towards the central belt over the next hour or two. But then they should fade away to leave most areas dry overnight once again, and thicker cloud than of late. Temperatures in towns and cities around 8 to 12 Celsius and winds light from the northeast. So to tomorrow and Friday's forecast, very similar to previous days this week. High pressure in charge, but there will be some showers around at times and probably a cloudier day compared with today. So it's a cloudy start in places, but like today, the cloud will thin and break and there'll be some sunshine by lunchtime in the afternoon and also a few sharp showers. So by mid-afternoon, say around 4 o'clock, in the best of the sunshine, temperatures up to around 21 Celsius. That shower risk probably through parts of Argyll and eastwards towards Stirling and Highland Perthshire. We can't take the position of those too literally, but that's the zone that we're expecting a few showers to develop. Towards the east coast, a little bit cooler, a bit cloudy up towards the northeast of Aberdeenshire, Caithness, and certainly a cloudy day for Orkney and Shetland. Cooler here compared with elsewhere. The rest of the afternoon into the evening, those showers take their time to fade away, but they go, and then it's a dry night. So to the weekend. Well, Saturday, very similar. Some cloud around, some sunshine, chance of showers across parts of Argyll and drifting eastwards. In the sunshine, up to around 20 or 21 Celsius, cooler in the east with that breeze off the sea and thicker cloud. And Sunday again, well, a lot of cloud around, a greater chance of catching a shower, actually, more widespread, but in the sunshine, highs of 21 degrees. That's been dry for quite a long time now, but next week signal that a change in the jet stream position, which means it's going to come probably further south, which means we're more likely to see low pressure, we're more likely to see rain and wind. That's the forecast for now.
Thanks so much, Chris. A quick reminder of tonight's main news. An independent review is to be held into the impact of policing during the miners' strike in 1984. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone in the team, good evening.